The shrill sound of the postal machine sorting envelopes has long been a familiar backdrop for Naomi Griffin. 17 years in the postal service in the small town of Everbluff, Colorado, had turned that mechanical noise into something of a working lullaby. Naomi automatically moved the letters from one stack to another while her thoughts wandered somewhere far away. "You've been quiet today," Jacqueline Gray said, sitting down on the edge of Naomi's desk. "Is something wrong?" Jacqueline had only been with the Postal Service for 5 years, but in that time, the women had become good friends. Tall, with short, curly hair dyed copper red, Jacqueline always stood out among the other employees with her energy and loud laugh. Naomi looked up from the stack of envelopes and smiled weakly. "Today is the 10th anniversary of Louis's death," she said quietly, lowering her gaze to the modest wedding ring she wore on her right hand in memory of her first husband. Jacqueline frowned and put her hand on her friend's shoulder. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot it was today." Naomi shrugged her shoulders. "It's okay. It's just such a rough." Louis Hardy had drowned 10 years ago in the Bluestone River that ran through the town. His body was never found, despite numerous search operations. After a year of fruitless searching, he was officially declared dead. Jacqueline nodded understandingly and squeezed her friend's hand. "You know what? Let's go to the Blue Jay after work tomorrow. Tamara Ellington's having a birthday party there, but we can sit separately if you want. You need to unwind." "We'll see," Naomi replied uncertainly. "Stephen wanted to cook something special tonight. He said he wanted to cheer me up." Jacqueline smiled. "Your Stephen is a real treasure. Takes care of you." "Yeah, I'm lucky." Naomi tried to smile, but it was a strained smile. Naomi met Stephen Griffin 8 months after Louis's disappearance. He was an accountant for a construction company and had stopped by the post office to send some documents. Their conversation went on long enough for him to invite her for coffee. 2 years later they married, and Naomi took his last name, leaving the past behind. At least she tried hard. "Miss Gray, if you're done with the small talk, I'd ask you to return to your duties." Tamara Ellington's cold voice interrupted their conversation. "We have a heavy workload today." Jacqueline straightened up and, with a wink to Naomi, went to her desk. Naomi continued sorting through the mail, trying not to meet her supervisor's gaze. Tamara Ellington was a stern woman with an impeccably straight posture and lips that were always pressed into a thin line. She demanded absolute discipline and did not tolerate even minute distractions from work. The day stretched slowly. Naomi felt the weight of memories weighing on her shoulders more and more with each passing hour. She checked zip codes, sorted letters into delivery areas, answered customer questions, but she did it all on autopilot. By the end of the workday, the sky was overcast with heavy gray clouds, promising rain. Naomi stayed late to finish the paperwork for a valuable parcel and was the last one out when dusk began to fall. A gusty wind ruffled the hem of her light coat as she walked to her car parked across the street from the post office. Naomi took her keys out of her bag and looked around. It was at that moment that she noticed a man standing under a streetlight on the street corner. He stood motionless, like a statue, and seemed to be staring straight at her. Even in the twilight, there was something painfully familiar about his posture, the way he tilted his head slightly to the left. Naomi froze, unable to believe her eyes. It was impossible, but the man looked exactly like Louis. The sudden sound of a passing car's klaxon made her flinch. When Naomi looked at the street corner again, the man had already disappeared. She looked around frantically, but the street was empty, with only the wind whipping fallen leaves across the pavement. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. Her hands trembled as she tried to insert the key into the car lock. On the third try, she finally managed to open the door. Naomi literally fell into the seat and slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. "This can't be happening," she thought, clenching the steering wheel to white knuckles. "Louis is dead, been dead for 10 years now. It's just a similar person, or a play of light, or my imagination." But no matter how hard she tried to calm herself, the image of the man under the lantern stood before her eyes. The same unfolding of his shoulders, the same characteristic head-tilted pose she'd seen 1,000 times with Louise. The drive home took twice as long as it usually did. Naomi drove slowly, constantly checking the rearview mirror, as if she expected to see a stalker. By the time she parked in front of her two-story house on Oak Street, she was so woozy she could barely breathe. The lights were on in the house. Stephen had already returned from work. That calmed her down a little. Naomi hurried along the path to the front door, feeling the darkness thickening behind her. Stephen met her in the hallway with a warm smile on his face. He was a head taller than Naomi, with broad shoulders and a strong build. In his 38 years, Stephen kept in great shape, playing basketball regularly with his coworkers on weekends. "Welcome back, darling." He leaned in to kiss her, but froze when he saw the look on her face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Naomi unbuttoned her coat with shaking hands. I think I saw Luis," she said in a low voice. Stephen stared at her in silence for a few seconds, then gently took her by the shoulders and led her into the living room. "Sit down. I'll get you some water." He returned a minute later with a glass of water and sat down next to her on the couch. Naomi took a few sips, feeling the cold liquid clear her head a little. "Tell me what happened," Stephen asked, gently removing a strand of hair from her face. Naomi took a deep breath and told him about the man she had seen outside the post office. With each word, she felt the tension gradually leave her body. In the cozy living room, next to her husband, everything that had happened began to seem distant and unreal. Stephen listened attentively without interrupting her, then took her hands in his. "Listen, today is the anniversary of that day. You've been thinking about it all day, remembering Louis. It's natural for your imagination to play tricks on you. You saw a similar man, and your mind added details from your memories. But he looked so real, Stephen. I'm pretty sure Louis is dead." Stephen interrupted her gently but firmly. "They haven't found his body, but witnesses saw him fall into the river. Remember what the sheriff said? The current in that place is very strong, and the body could have been carried miles down the river. Besides, it's been 10 years. If Louis was alive, he'd have shown up a long time ago." The logic in his words was undeniable. Naomi nodded slowly. "You're right. Of course you're right. It's just been such an emotional." Stephen wrapped his arms around her and Naomi snuggled into him, closing her eyes. She always felt safe in his arms. "I made your favorite curry," he said after a few minutes. "And I opened that bottle of red wine you liked so much last week." Naomi smiled gratefully. "What would I do without you?" Dinner helped her relax a little, though the image of the man under the streetlight still occasionally surfaced in her mind. After dinner, they sat on the couch, watching a movie, but Naomi couldn't concentrate on the plot. Her thoughts kept returning to what she had seen. That night, she couldn't sleep for a long time, tossing from side to side. Sleep came only in the morning, restless and intermittent. The next day began as usual. Naomi woke to the sound of the alarm clock, showered, and made breakfast for herself and Stephen. Last night's incident seemed less significant, almost unreal, after the night's rest. Perhaps Stephen was right, and it was just a play of the imagination, heightened by the emotional day. At work, Naomi immediately fell into a familiar routine. Tamara Ellington walked around the office with a clipboard in hand, checking each employee's work and making notes. Jacqueline winked at Naomi across the room, but they didn't dare to talk under the watchful eye of her boss. Around noon, Naomi went to the back room to get a new batch of envelopes for sorting. When she returned to her desk, she noticed a small envelope lying on top of a stack of work papers. The envelope was plain white, no stamp or address, only her name handwritten on the front. Naomi looked around. No one was looking in her direction. Everyone was busy with their work. She carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a doubled folded piece of paper. Inside was just one sentence, printed in large print. "It's time to pay for past sins." The blood rushed from Naomi's face. Her hands trembled so violently that she dropped the sheet on the table. She looked around again, now fearfully, looking for someone who might have planted the note, but there were only the familiar faces of co-workers busy with their own tasks. "Naomi, are you okay?" Jacqueline's voice brought her out of her stupor. Her friend was standing next to her with a concerned expression on her face. "You're white as chalk." Naomi hastily folded the note and slipped it into her skirt pocket. Yeah, I'm just a little dizzy. Must be the pressure. Jacqueline looked at her incredulously, but didn't insist. Why don't you get a drink of water, or go out for some fresh air? No, I'm fine. Really. Naomi tried to smile, but it felt unnatural. I have to finish this batch before the lunch break. Jacqueline looked at her questioningly for a second, then nodded and went back to her desk. Naomi forced herself to continue working, but her thoughts were far away. Who would plant such a note on her? And what did it mean to pay for past sins? Her fingers sorted through the letters, but every few minutes she glanced at the front door, as if expecting to see Louis there. It was absurd, she knew that, but she couldn't help the growing sense of unease. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Naomi had made her third sorting error, sending the letters for the northern neighborhood into the stack for the southern neighborhood. Tamara Ellington noticed this and approached her desk with a disgruntled expression on her face. Mrs. Griffin, that's the third mistake today, she said icily. What's going on with you? I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellington. I'm having a bad day. We all have bad days, Mrs. Griffin, but that's no excuse for unprofessionalism. If you can't perform your duties properly, perhaps you should take the day off. No, that won't be necessary. I'll be more careful, Naomi replied hastily. They couldn't afford to lose even a day's wages, especially now that she and Stephen were planning a kitchen remodel. Tamara pressed her lips together, clearly unconvinced, but nodded and walked away, leaving Naomi even more stressed. The day seemed endless. By the time the workday was over, Naomi's nerves were stretched to the limit. She hurriedly packed her things and, after saying goodbye to Jacqueline, walked quickly out of the post office building. This time she looked around the street carefully before heading for her car. No Louis or anyone resembling him was in sight. Nevertheless, she almost ran to the car, constantly looking over her shoulder. On the way home, Naomi couldn't stop thinking about the note. It's time to pay for past sins. What did that mean? Who could have sent her such a message? And did the man she'd seen yesterday have anything to do with it? Stephen had not yet returned from work when she arrived home. Naomi locked the doors and checked all the windows before allowing herself to relax a little. She pulled the note out of her pocket and reread it again. A simple sentence, printed on an ordinary printer on ordinary paper. It was nothing special, but the words reeked of unconcealed menace. When Stephen got home around 7 in the evening, Naomi sat in the living room in the dark, clutching the note in her hands. Why are you sitting in the dark? He asked, turning on the light. Then, seeing her face, he quickly walked over and sat down next to her. What's wrong? Silently, Naomi held out the note to him. Stephen read it, frowned, then reread it again. Where did you find this? On my desk today, Naomi answered in a shaky voice. Someone dropped it off while I went to get a new batch of mail. Stephen scrutinized the note, then tossed it carelessly on the coffee table. It didn't make any sense. Probably someone's stupid joke. A joke? Naomi was indignant. It doesn't look like a joke to me, Stephen, especially after what I saw yesterday. Stephen sighed and rubbed his forehead. Look, you work at the post office. Hundreds of letters and parcels pass through your hands every day. One of your customers could have a grudge against you over something as small as a late delivery, wrong address, whatever. This note is just a way to scare you. And the man who looks like Louis? Is that a coincidence too? Yes, Stephen answered firmly. Yes, Stephen said firmly. A coincidence and a play on your imagination. Louis is dead, Naomi. Dead for 10 years. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself as if she were cold. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't help but think that the two events are somehow connected. Stephen put his arms around her and pulled her to him. It's going to be okay, I promise. If you want, we can go to the police about the note. Though I doubt they'll take it seriously. One unsigned threat with no specifics. They'll say the same thing I did. Someone's inappropriate joke. Naomi snuggled into him, seeking comfort in his arms. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all just a chain of strange coincidences. But something deep inside her screamed danger so real she could almost feel it. Let's have dinner, Stephen suggested, kissing the top of her head. I stopped by the Blue Jay and got your favorite steak. Food and a glass of wine will help you relax. Naomi let him lead her away to the kitchen, but the feeling of unease never left her. Even at dinner, Listening to Stephen talk about his day at work, she couldn't stop thinking about the note and the mysterious man under the streetlight. After dinner, they settled down on the couch to watch television. Stephen quickly became engrossed in the basketball game, and Naomi tried to read a book, but she couldn't concentrate. Her eyes kept returning to the heavy curtained windows. About 11 o'clock, they went to bed. Stephen fell asleep almost immediately, and Naomi lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house at night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the branches outside the window made her heart race. When sleep finally began to overtake her, something struck the bedroom window with a loud thud, shattering the glass. Stephen instantly woke up and jumped out of bed. "What was that?" He ran to the window and pulled back the curtain. On the bedroom floor, among the shards of glass, lay a brick. "Stay here," he ordered, and ran out of the room. Naomi heard him run down the stairs and open the front door. A few seconds later came his shout, "Hey, stop!" She ran to the broken window and looked out. Stephen was standing on the front lawn, staring after the fleeing figure. Naomi couldn't see the man's face, but his silhouette was painfully familiar. The same manner of running, the same turn of the shoulders. Stephen returned to the house a few minutes later, pale and shaken. "Did you see him?" Naomi asked, her whole body trembling. "Was it him?" Stephen nodded slowly, and this silent admission frightened her more than anything else. "I couldn't catch up with him, but yes, he looked like Louis, very much like him." They called the police, but by the time the patrol arrived, the attacker was long gone. The young officer took their statements, examined the scene, and promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood. But it was obvious he wasn't taking the situation too seriously. "Probably just hooligans," he said, closing his notebook. "There has been an increase in vandalism in the neighborhood lately. I recommend that you install CCTV cameras." After the police left, Stephen taped up the broken window and pulled the curtains tightly around the house. "It can't be Louis," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It's just not possible." "But you said yourself that he was similar." "He did, yes, but that doesn't mean it's him." Stephen ran his hand over his face, looking suddenly older. "Louis drowned. We both know that." Naomi wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. Yes, they knew that Louis had drowned. But what if they were wrong? What if he had somehow survived? And now he'd come back to... what? Revenge? For what? They spent the rest of the night without sleep, flinching at every rustle. When dawn came, Naomi felt broken, as if she'd been sick. "Maybe you'd better stay home tonight," Stephen suggested over breakfast, which neither of them could eat. Naomi shook her head. "No, I'm going to go to work. I don't want to be alone in the house." At work, Naomi could feel Jacqueline's concerned looks on her, but she couldn't find the strength to explain what was going on. How could she tell the truth? "My first husband, who is supposed to be dead, seems to be back and haunting us." It sounded like the plot of a cheap thriller. Her performance had plummeted to a low ebb. She made mistake after mistake, mixing up addresses, forgetting to stamp, losing letters. By the end of the day, Tamara Ellington's patience was wearing thin. "Mrs. Griffin, come into my office," she called when Naomi dropped the stack of letters for the third time. The supervisor's small office was stuffy and smelled of cheap perfume. Tamara pointed to the chair across from her desk. "Naomi, what's been going on with you the last 2 days?" she asked, folding her hands on the desk. "You've always been a model employee, and now you're making mistakes that even a rookie wouldn't make." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellington. I have some personal problems," Naomi replied uncertainly. "We all have personal problems from time to time, Mrs. Griffin, but we don't let them affect our work." Naomi clenched her fists, trying to contain her growing irritation. "I'm trying, really. It's just that these 2 days have been particularly difficult." On the 5th day after the incident with the window, Naomi couldn't take it anymore. She called Jacqueline and asked her to meet her at the Blue Jay Cafe during her lunch break. Jacqueline agreed without asking too many questions, although she could clearly hear the concern in her voice. Naomi arrived at the cafe first. Taking a table in the far corner, away from the windows, she fidgeted nervously with her napkin, tearing it into small pieces. The waitress came twice to take her order, but Naomi asked her to wait until her friend arrived. Jacqueline appeared at 1 o'clock sharp, bursting noisily into the quiet cafe. Her bright floral blouse and massive turquoise earrings stood out against the muted interior of the Blue Jay. When she spotted Naomi, she smiled broadly and made her way to her table. "Finally!" Jacqueline exclaimed, sitting down across from her friend. "I was beginning to worry. You didn't answer my messages. How are you?" Naomi tried to smile, but it was crooked and unnatural. "Yeah, hanging in there." Jacqueline looked at her carefully, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the pallor of her skin. "You look terrible, sweetheart. What's wrong?" "Jacqueline, I need to talk to someone. I can't hold it in any longer." The worried expression on Jacqueline's face became even more obvious. She leaned closer. "Of course, I'm always ready to listen. What's going on?" At that moment, the waitress came over. They ordered coffee and sandwiches, though Naomi doubted she could swallow a bite. When the waitress stepped away, Naomi took a deep breath and looked directly into her friend's eyes. "Remember I told you about my first husband? About Louis?" Jacqueline nodded. "Of course. He drowned in the river, didn't he? 10 years ago." "Yes. No." Naomi looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was listening. "He didn't drown on his own. Stephen and we drowned him." Jacqueline froze with her mouth hanging open. A whole range of emotions flashed across her face: disbelief, shock, fright. "What?" she whispered at last. What?" Naomi clasped her hands together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Stephen and I were lovers before Louis died." The words came out of her like a torrent she'd been holding back for too long. "We'd been seeing each other in secret for almost a year. Louis didn't suspect a thing. He was too busy working, too busy with his company. And then we found out that Louis had changed his will. All his money, his house, his insurance, all of it, was to go to his parents, not me." Jacqueline listened without moving, an expression of absolute shock on her face. "Stephen and we didn't plan to kill him, I swear. It was an accident. We went fishing, the three of us, on the Bluestone River. Louis liked to fish. An argument broke out on the bank. Louis said he knew about Stephen and me, that he'd been following me. He started threatening to take everything, to leave me penniless. Stephen pushed him. Louis fell into the water. But then he started to get to shore, and Stephen grabbed an oar and hit him over the head, and then we held him underwater until he stopped moving. The waitress brought their order, and both women fell silent. When they were alone again, Jacqueline still looked as if she had seen a ghost. But you said there were witnesses to his falling into the river," she said in a shaky voice. "We made up that story. There were no witnesses. We were alone out there on the river. We left his boat overturned near the shore, and we called the emergency services from the city. They said that he had gone fishing alone, and we were supposedly at home. By then, the current would have carried the body far down the river." Jacqueline shook her head slowly, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "Naomi, why are you telling me this? Why now?" Naomi leaned even closer, her voice barely audible. "Because Louis is back, Jacqueline. He's alive. And he came for us." She talked about the man she'd seen outside the post office, about the note, about the night's incident with the brick. Jacqueline's eyes widened more and more with each word. "But it's impossible," she whispered when Naomi had finished her story. "If what you're saying is true, and you and Stephen—" She couldn't pronounce the word murdered. Then how could Louis have survived? "I don't know." Naomi shook her head. "But I saw him, Jacqueline. And Stephen saw him too. It's definitely him." They sat in silence for several minutes. The coffee was getting cold. The untouched sandwiches lay on their plates. Finally, Jacqueline ran her hand over her face and took a deep breath. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Naomi repeated again. "We can't go to the police. If Louis is really alive, we'll be arrested for attempted murder. And if he's dead and it's someone who just looks like him, then we could be behind bars for a murder we committed 10 years ago." Jacqueline was silent, her eyes staring off into space. "You're judging me," Naomi said quietly. "I understand. I've judged myself every day for the last 10 years. I don't know what to say, Jacqueline admitted honestly. It's too much to comprehend at once. You say that you and Stephen killed your husband, and now he's somehow come back to life and is stalking you. It sounds like the plot of a horror movie. I know, Naomi lowered her head. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I had to tell someone. Why me? Jacqueline asked, a hint of fear in her voice. Am I in danger now too? No, Naomi assured her hastily. Louis doesn't know about you. I met you after this. After all this, it's not your fault. Jacqueline seemed to relax a little, but she still looked shaken. Look, she said after a pause. Maybe you and Stephen should get away for a while. Take a vacation, go somewhere far away from here. I've suggested that to Stephen. He says we can't just run away. If Louis really found us now, he'll find us later. Well then, maybe we should talk to him. Try to explain ourselves? Explain? Naomi grinned bitterly. How do you explain to a man that you tried to kill him? They were silent again. Jacqueline fidgeted with her napkin, avoiding Naomi's eyes. Finally, she said quietly, I don't know what I can do to help, Naomi. This is beyond me. I'm not asking you to help, Naomi replied. I just wanted someone to know the truth, in case, if something happened to me or Stephen. Jacqueline flinched at those words. Do you think Louis is capable of... I don't know, Naomi repeated for the third time. I would have said no before. Louis was a gentleman, incapable of violence. But now, after everything we've done to him, I don't know what he's capable of. The rest of the meeting was spent in tense silence. When it was time to leave, Jacqueline hugged Naomi awkwardly, as if she didn't know how to feel about her friend. Take care of yourself, she said. Keep me posted, okay? Naomi nodded, feeling hot tears stinging her eyes. She knew that this meeting was probably the last. Jacqueline now knew the truth, and that truth had changed their friendship forever. Upon returning home, Naomi caught Stephen in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, surrounded by papers and folders. What's this? She asked, coming closer. Our papers, he answered without lifting his head. Insurance, title deeds, bank statements. I'm checking to make sure everything is in order. Why? Stephen looked up at her tiredly. In case we have to leave quickly. Naomi sank down onto the sofa beside him. You've changed your mind? Now you think we should leave? I don't know what to think, Stephen admitted, putting the papers aside. This whole thing, it's a nightmare. If it really is Louis, how the hell did he survive? We saw him stop moving. We held him underwater until we were sure he was dead. Maybe he just passed out and then the current carried him to shore downriver, Naomi suggested. Maybe someone had found him and helped him. Then why hadn't he come forward sooner? Why did he wait 10 years? I don't know, Naomi shook her head. Maybe he had amnesia? Or was he wounded too badly and took too long to recover? Or was he just waiting for the right time to make us suffer? Stephen stood up and started pacing the room, nervously running his fingers through his hair. This is insane. This whole thing is pure madness. I told Jacqueline, Naomi said quietly. Stephen stopped abruptly and turned to her. You what? I told Jacqueline about what we did to Louis, she repeated without looking up. I had to tell someone, Stephen. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. Are you crazy? He exclaimed, coming toward her. Now she'll go to the police and we'll be arrested. She's not going to the police. She's my friend. Your friend who just found out you're a murderer. You really think she'd keep a secret like that? Naomi covered her face with her hands. I don't know, Stephen. I just don't know. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of always looking over my shoulder. If Louis is really coming back for us, maybe we should just give up? Admit everything? Are you serious? Stephen leaned toward her, his face contorted with anger. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in prison? Because that's what will happen if we confess. What if Louis goes to the police? What if he's already been there? If he went to the police, they'd already be here. No, he wants something else. Maybe money? We could offer him money to make him disappear. Naomi looked at her husband with disbelief. Do you really think money will solve this problem? After what we did to him? Stephen sank down on the sofa beside her, suddenly looking very tired. I don't know what to think, Naomi. I'm just trying to find a way out. They sat in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Outside the window, Dusk was slowly descending, filling the room with shadows. Naomi made no attempt to turn on the light. The twilight was strangely soothing. "What should we do?" she asked at last. "Wait," Stephen answered after a long pause. "If it really is Louis, he'll show up again. And then we'll decide what to do." The uncertainty was the worst of it. Waiting for the unknown, the constant tension that made her nerves tingle and her muscles ache. Naomi couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow seemed to be Louis's silhouette. Stephen took time off work, not wanting to leave Naomi alone at home. They went grocery shopping together, cooked dinner together, sat in front of the TV together, unaware of what was happening on the screen. It was like two prisoners in the same cell, waiting to be sentenced. 3 days had passed. 3 days of constant fear and tension. No new notes, no bricks through the windows, no mysterious figures in the street. This lull was even more unnerving than the direct threats. On the 4th day, Jacqueline called Naomi. "How are you?" she asked, and Naomi could hear the genuine concern in her voice, despite her shocking confession a few days earlier. "I'm fine," Naomi lied. "It's nothing new. It's good, isn't it? Maybe you just dreamed the whole thing." "Stephen saw him too, Jacqueline. It's not a hallucination." I know, Jacqueline agreed hastily. "It's just, I'm worried about you." "Thank you. I appreciate it." After a short conversation, Naomi hung up the phone and turned to Stephen, who was standing in the kitchen doorway. "Jacqueline?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "She's worried. She didn't mention the police." "No, I told you she wouldn't go there." Stephen didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. They made dinner together, a simple pasta and sauce that they could barely bring themselves to eat. After dinner, they sat down to watch television, as they had done every night for the last few days. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, there was a knock on the door. They froze, looking at each other with the same look of horror on their faces. The knock came again, insistent and loud. "The police?" Naomi whispered. "They would have introduced themselves," Stephen replied in the same whisper. "Stay here." He stood up and cautiously headed for the door. Naomi followed him, unable to stay in the living room alone. Stephen looked through the peephole, then jerked back as if he'd seen something terrible. "Who is it?" Naomi asked, feeling her heart racing in her chest. Stephen turned to her, his face white as chalk. "It's him," he breathed out. "Louis." The knocking was repeated, louder now. "I know you're in there," came a voice from the other side of the door, a voice Naomi hadn't heard in 10 years, but would recognize from 1,000. "Open the door, or I'll break it down." Naomi swayed, suddenly feeling weak in her legs. Stephen picked her up, keeping her from falling. "What do we do?" she whispered. Stephen looked around, as if searching for an escape route, but the only way out was the door, with Louis standing behind it. "We have to open it," he said at last. "If we don't, he might actually break the door down, or go around the house and break the window." Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice. Stephen went to the door, and taking a deep breath, turned the key in the lock. The door opened slowly, and Louis Hardy appeared on the doorstep. He had changed little in the past 10 years. Still the same sharp features, still the same dark eyes, still the same unruly curly hair, now streaked with gray at the temples. There was a scar on his cheekbone that hadn't been there before, a long, thin line running down to his jaw. But what scared Naomi the most was the gun in his hand, pointed directly at Stephen. "Hello, darling," Louis said with a smile that sent a chill down her spine. "It's been a long time." "Louis," she breathed out, unable to believe it was really him, alive and real, standing in front of her. How did I survive?" He finished for her. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Would you like to come inside?" Stephen and Naomi backed away, letting him inside. Louis stepped in, closed the door behind him, and pointed his gun at the living room. "Let's go in there. It will be more comfortable to talk." They walked silently into the living room. Naomi and Stephen sat down on the couch, and Louis took the chair across from them, still holding the gun at the ready. "You must be surprised," he began, watching their reactions. "I understand. You were so sure you'd killed me." "Louis?" Naomi moved forward, but froze when he pointed the gun at her. Please, let's talk. We can explain everything. Explain? He interjected with a bitter chuckle. What exactly do you want to explain, Naomi? How you and your lover decided to get rid of me? How you kept me underwater until I stopped moving? Or maybe how you took all my money and my house while they thought I was dead? We didn't mean to kill you, Stephen interjected. It was an accident. You fell into the water and… Shut up! Louis shouted, rising from his chair. Don't you dare lie to my face! You hit me on the head with something, and then the two of you held me underwater. It wasn't an accident. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down, then sat up again. You want to know how I survived? I'll tell you. When you thought I was dead and let me go, the current picked up my body and carried me down the river. I was unconscious, but not dead. I washed ashore about a mile from where you tried to drown me. I was found by a fisherman, an old man who lived as a hermit in a hut near the river. He pulled me to shore, gave me CPR, saved my life. Luis was silent, as if immersed in a memory. I was in very bad shape. Concussion from the paddle, water in my lungs, hypothermia. The old man wouldn't call an ambulance. He had his own reasons for avoiding the authorities. He nursed me back to health in his cabin for weeks. When I finally recovered enough to speak, I learned that it had been almost 2 months. Why didn't you come back? Naomi asked quietly. Why didn't you go to the police? Louis looked at her with an expression bordering on pity. Why didn't you? So you could finish what you started? No, I decided it was better to stay dead. Let you calm down, let you believe you're safe, and watch you from afar. You've been watching us all this time? Stephen was horrified. No, not all the time. Louis shook his head. The first few years I was too busy recovering and surviving. I had no papers, no money. Everything stayed with you. The old man helped me get back on my feet, taught me how to live outside the system. When he died 5 years ago, I started wondering what happened to you. Hired a private investigator who found you here in Everbluff. I found out that you were married, that you were living in my house that I bought for Naomi, that you were spending my money. Louis, please, Naomi cried, tears streaming down her face. We made a terrible mistake. We were young, stupid, scared. You were in your 30s, Louis cut her off coldly, old enough to know what you were doing. You're right, Naomi nodded. You're absolutely right. We're guilty, and there's no excuse for what we did. But please, let's resolve this in a civilized way. We'll give you everything back. The house, the money, everything we have. Do you think I'm here for the money? Louis shook his head. No, Naomi. I came for justice. We'll go to the police, Stephen suggested. We'll confess everything. Just please put the gun down. The police won't give me back 10 years of my life, Louis said sharply. It won't give me back my peace of mind. It won't wash away the betrayal of the woman I loved most in the world and the man I thought was a friend. Stephen rose slowly from the couch, putting his hands out in front of him in a conciliatory gesture. Louis, I understand your anger. You have every right to hate us, but think about the consequences. If you use that gun, you'll end up in prison. You'll lose more years of your life. Is it worth it? Sit down, Louis ordered, pointing the gun directly at Stephen's chest. I'm not finished. Stephen slowly sank back down onto the couch. Naomi sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Do you know what's been the hardest thing all these years? Louis continued thoughtfully, as if thinking out loud. Not the physical pain, not the lack of papers and money, not having to live like a ghost. It was the realization that the woman I loved with all my heart, the woman I dedicated my life to, was planning my murder in cold blood. That's not true, Naomi whispered through her tears. We didn't plan to kill you, I swear. It really happened spontaneously. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Louis grinned bitterly. That you decided to kill me in the spur of the moment rather than planning ahead? He stood up and began to walk slowly around the room, keeping his eyes on the couple sitting on the couch. 10 years I've lived with this pain. 10 years I woke up at night with nightmares in which I relived over and over again the moment when I saw in your eyes, Naomi, not love, but the cold desire for my death. For 10 years I watched from afar as you lived happily in my house, spending my money, building your life on my death. Naomi wept silently, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Stephen sat with his head down, his hands clenched into fists and unclenched. "Louis, I'm begging you," Naomi finally said, trying to see his face through her tears. "I know we don't deserve forgiveness, but please don't do something you'll regret. You're not a killer, Louis. You've always been a kind, decent man." "You're right," Louis nodded after a long pause. "I'm not a killer, but you see, Naomi, what is it? The Louis you knew, the kind and decent man, he really drowned in the Bluestone River 10 years ago. The man standing in front of you now is someone else. Someone who had everything taken away from him and who lived for 10 years with the sole thought of revenge." "Louis, please," Stephen tried again. "Let's talk calmly. We can make this right. We'll admit our guilt, give you back everything you had, with interest. We'll—" The sound of a gunshot cut his speech short. Stephen froze with his mouth open, staring in disbelief at the blurring red stain on his chest. Then he slowly fell on his side. Naomi screamed. Louis pointed the gun at her, and she fell silent, frozen with an expression of absolute horror on her face. "You say you didn't plan to kill me," Louis said almost calmly. "I've been planning yours for 10 years. Thought about it every day, visualized this moment, rehearsed it over and over in my head." Naomi stared at him wide-eyed, unable to take her eyes off the gun. "I imagined you begging for mercy, offering money, confessions, anything to save your own hides," Louis continued. "But you know what I didn't envision? I didn't think that I would actually feel nothing. Not satisfaction, not joy, not even relief. Just emptiness." "Louis," Naomi whispered, her voice shaking. "If there's even a shred of the man I once loved left in you—" "That's the point, Naomi," Louis interrupted her. "You never loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have been able to hold my head underwater while you watched the life drain out of me." The second shot sounded as sudden as the first. Naomi leaned back against the back of the couch. Her eyes remained open, but the life had left them. A drop of blood slowly trickled down her temple. Louis lowered the gun and looked around. The room that had once been his living room now looked foreign. New furniture, new wallpaper, new pictures on the walls. They showed Naomi and Stephen smiling, embracing each other, standing against a backdrop of ocean, mountains, cityscapes. A life that should have been his, but had been stolen. He walked over to the fireplace and opened the small cabinet next to it. There, as he had suspected, were bottles of alcohol stored there. Louis chose the strongest whiskey and began methodically pouring it around the room, on the couch, on the carpet, on the curtains. When the bottle was empty, he opened a second bottle and continued. When he had finished with the living room, he went up to the second floor and did the same in the bedroom and study. Back in the living room, he took a lighter out of his pocket and a small photograph. His and Naomi's wedding photo, the only thing he kept from his past life. Louis stared at the photo for a long moment, then lit it and tossed it onto the whiskey-soaked carpet. The flames instantly engulfed the fabric and began to spread across the room. He stood for a few seconds, watching the fire devour the couch where Naomi and Stephen's bodies lay, then turned and walked out of the house, closing the door tightly behind him. It was a quiet, windless night outside. Louis walked slowly away from the house without looking back. He didn't know where he was going or what he would do next. For 10 years his life had been ruled by a single goal: revenge. Now that that goal had been accomplished, he felt devastated and lost. When Louis was already at the end of the street, there was a rumble behind him. Part of the roof had collapsed. Flames rose high above the house, illuminating the night sky with an ominous orange light. Sirens sounded in the distance. Some of the neighbors must have called the fire department. Louis quickened his step. He needed to get as far away from here as possible before the firemen and police arrived. Disappear into the night, as he had learned to do over the past 10 years. When he reached the intersection, he finally allowed himself to turn around. The house he had once been happy in, the house that was to be his family nest, was burning like a funeral pyre, symbolizing the end of a story that had begun 10 years ago on the banks of the Bluestone River. Louis turned and continued his journey into the darkness, leaving behind the flames devouring the last remnants of his past life and the people who had taken that life from him. The justice he had sought for so long had turned out to be bitter and empty. But at least now he could move on, where, he didn't know yet, But it was already a new chapter, a new path, a path that began here, on the ashes of his past.